putting it on YouTube. Just give me a second. Putting it on YouTube. Just give me a second. Okay, so that's all done. Great. Thank you for joining. And let me press record. We'll start. Right, okay, thanks for joining in today. We're looking at starting a new unit, which is organization behavior. Now, this is one of the mandatory units that everybody has to study in regards to people or students who are actually looking at studying the BTech Higher National Diploma in Business and Management. Now, before we start, what I'm going to do is obviously give you a bit of an introduction of the unit and also explain how this unit is going to be covered. And then a number of sessions that we will hold. And also then we'll go into, in the second part, go into the learning outcome 1 and some of the indicative content. Now, when we look at Pearson BTech qualifications in general, this particular unit has been in the qualification since 2009, at least from what I know, but it has undergone a lot of revision. And this unit in particular, when we talk about organization and organization behavior, what we are essentially looking at is primarily the reasons of understanding, what is organization, why does a company or business, let's say an entity, look at organizing people to be able to get them together behind a certain achievement of a certain purpose or a goal. And this generally tends to be the formation of an organization. Sometimes we classify them as, organizations which are sole traders, companies which could be formed as people wherein they are single unit businesses. Sometimes we talk about small, medium enterprises, large, PLCs or public limited corporations, and all these would encompass the term organization. So organization typically would be getting a group of people together to do some activities, and these activities are done for a particular purpose. And when they are doing it for a similar purpose to achieve a goal and objective, we'll be looking at, coining the term as organization. Now, if I add the word behavior, I think we are all familiar with the word behavior, but if I just look at individually, what does the definition of the word behavior mean? Then behavior is something which we classify as the way I conduct or the way you conduct yourself in front of others. And generally speaking, the way in which you interact, conduct, behave, or in some cases, I would say, how do you come across specifically when dealing with other people will be termed as behavior. Now, if I combine this particular term, organization behavior, then what we are looking at is we are looking at studying how people, when they work within a structure, I'll use the word structure rather than an organization, is because organization is something which we'll use again and again. So a different word would be when people work within a particular structure with a common objective to achieving a particular aim or objective, then in that case, and the study of that we do in order to understand that structure and how people behave within that environment when they are working together to be able to achieve that objective in general would be termed as, the study of an organization and its people in terms of how they behave and how they come together or work together to be able to achieve that objective. And that would be termed as, organization behavior. So it would be an academic study of how people interact with each other within groups. And this is what is the essence of the unit, organization behavior. And in terms, sometimes you would also say that when we talk about how people behave within a particular structure, how they conduct themselves, how they come across, how they interact with each other, what relationships are formed, and how this helps the organization to a certain extent, or company or an entity to achieve its goals and objectives would primarily be the study of organization behavior. Now, when we do this, we are going to be looking at individuals, we are going to be looking at structures, we're going to be looking at entities, groups, teams, and then look at the whole concept of how performance can be, of individuals working together can be measured, evaluated, monitored, reviewed. And in general, in doing that, what we're also going to do is study a lot of principles and theories related to the background of how organization behavior as a study came up, or as a area of study came up over the years, over the decades. And the idea here would be to make an attempt to explain how this particular domain or this subject area is used by HR managers in particular, by managers in particular, to be able to help align everybody behind the aims and objectives of the organization. To ask everyone to sing from the same songbook, if I would say, in a way, and that would be relative. What that would be is what I would say is the study and the module that we are looking at, or unit that we are looking at, which is organizational behavior. In essence, it will talk about, we looking at in detail about how people interact with one another inside a particular organization, such as a business, and how this particular scope, or this area of study has come about over the years, and how it has evolved is what we would want to understand. And then maybe from the learnings of this particular unit, you'd be able to see that when you join an organization, there's a particular culture there. You are expected to conform to certain rules and regulations. You're given a handbook. You essentially are representing the organization in terms of doing certain things. And that is where you see the influence of organization, individuals' behavior influencing the culture of the organization. And that is where we will again look at this particular context of the study of behavior of individuals within the organization, and that will be nothing but organization behavior. Now, it is a multidisciplinary field. There are lots of different types of sciences which come into when we talk about organizational behavior. It will include, we going back into like a memory lane, going into psychology, going into sociology, going into management theories to understand how human behavior or how people essentially or human behavior happens in a workplace. Now, the goal of this particular unit is to understand and learn tools and techniques that you are going to use as an individual when you work within the organization. And those tools and techniques would help you improve productivity, your efficiency, and also the overall effectiveness in terms of how you deliver the aims and objectives of the organization. Heavy words, but in essence, what they would mean is that if I work as an administrator or as a sales executive or as a marketing person or as an HR officer within an organization, how do I do my roles, or how do I carry out my roles and responsibilities on a day in, day out basis, which will be done in order to ensure that, one, I'm productive, I'm carrying my weight, as sometimes people say it in the organization, you're efficient in what you do. That means you do not make mistakes, errors are not committed, and you're expected, your outcomes are the outcomes which your manager or your department head is expecting you to achieve. And in this case, what you're looking at is helping thereby the organization to be overall effective in terms of achieving the goal of the month or goal of the year, or maybe the direction which the management is set. For example, it could be a sales goal, looking at the turnover, looking at profitability, looking at market share targets. But what is your role and how do you play that role would be the place wherein you will be looking at understanding how to use the tools and techniques to understand the culture, to understand the, say, working within teams, groups, and then using those tools to be able to be more productive, efficient, and overall effective, thereby helping the organization achieve its aims and objective. Now, during the course of the study of this particular unit, there are 4 learning outcomes, learning outcome 1, 2, 3, and 4. And each of the learning outcome will focus on a certain aspect of the unit. And this certain aspect of the unit will include us examining things like motivation and motivation theories, which is going to come in learning outcome 2. The reason I say motivation and motivation theories, if I work within an organization, a simple example that I would give you here, if I work within an organization and I work within sales, I achieve my targets, then what keeps me motivated to stay within the organization? Am I achieving my targets year on year? Am I getting any incentive bonuses, incentive trips, holiday trips? Am I getting promotion? Am I getting a raise in salary? So those are the tools which the HR would essentially use to keep their workforce motivated. They will have discussions with the line managers, department heads, and say, okay, this person is doing quite well, is meeting the KPIs, is meeting the targets year on year. And obviously there is something that the organization needs to do in order to retain him, in order to motivate him, so that he or she stays within the organization. And that is where we look at studying motivational theories. We'll also be kind of diving into slightly to understand communication and leadership theories. because within the organization, one of the key things that you will look at is when you have to manage teams and when you have to work within teams, what you are going to say and see is that managing a team, working within a team would require you to essentially sometimes show leadership and leadership traits, leadership theories. We are going to be looking at them also generically. Then there's an essence of teamwork, which is basically learning outcome 3. So we are going to be looking at team working theories which are, Tuckman's model, Dr. Belbin's model. We are going to be looking at some of the key frameworks which will help you understand what is the role an individual can take while working within a team in an organization. We'll also be understanding the concept of power, politics, and the influence of politics on the culture of the organization. So when we talk about the influence of culture within the organization, we are going to be looking at studying culture models here, and they would be related to Mendelow's matrix. There will be some models that Charles Handy's model of power and politics we will look at. And this is again going to be looking at frameworks to understand how does a culture within the organization develop? Why does an organization exude a particular type of culture when you meet employees, when you meet people within the organization, and how does the culture of the organization influence decision making in that company, in that organization, in that entity, and thereby looking at how managers use decision making as a tool to be able to help achieve objectives or goals which have been set by the management. So this study of this particular unit will look at 4 learning outcomes. And the idea here would be to understand management approaches to working within the organization, to leading to motivation theories, leadership theories, communication theories, looking at teamwork, team building models, and then looking at power, politics, and culture of how that influences the working of an individual within the organization. And then finally, how does decision making as a process happen within the organization, because it could be influenced by power, politics, and culture, and how does that decision making at the end of the day is used by managers, leaders within the organization to achieve objectives. Now, there are many people who have studied this particular subject. There is one in particular, Kogan, and I would probably be looking at quoting him quite a lot. And then we have L.M. Prasad, who's considered to be one of the persons who has done a lot of research in this particular sector. And he, to a certain extent, along with some of the others, because these are all people who have worked in teams and have contributed to this subject, they define organizational behavior as a study which uses and applies the knowledge which is gained by understanding human behavior and then understanding the elements of it to be able to put structure and then use technology and social systems to get work done or to help achieve the aims and objectives of the organization. So it is something that we will be discussing in a great detail, because this is a topic that everyone should be aware of. Everyone probably will experience this when you start working within an organization or a business or a company at some stage when you start work, obviously work, and you would get to see and understand some of it that you are going to study, and you would see it in working when you start working within an organization. That why have I been put into this team? What is my role in that team? How do I get judged? What powers do I have in terms of making decisions? And in terms of how reviews happen, how my progress is monitored, what does the organization give me as a loyalty or as a bonus at the end of it when I achieve my aims and objectives, and how does the organization essentially reward me in terms of keeping me as a valuable resource which helps contributes towards the achievement of the objectives of the organization. So it's a vast topic. And as I mentioned, we're going to be diving into and looking at concepts from psychology, sociology, management theories, leadership, and then to a certain extent, power, politics, and culture within the organization. So I hope that gives you a bit of a background in terms of what the unit is going to entail, how we are going to study, and what are the key topics that we are going to be touching on while we study this particular unit. Now, if I take you into the indicative content, because there are 4 learning outcomes, you're going to be at least looking at 4 to 6 lectures to cover this particular unit. And in each lecture, we are going to be focusing on covering one learning outcome, and that would be looking at starting with learning outcome 1. Now, what the slides, when I share with you, and obviously some handouts and other material that I share with you, which will be available on Moodle, will typically be consisting of everything which has been mentioned in the indicative content for that particular learning outcome, so that the bits that you study are directly related to the unit, and the concepts that you are studying, key frameworks, models that you are studying, are going to help build your knowledge. And obviously, at some stage, when you use them, it'll help build your skills on this side to understand how do you work within the organization, what role you have within the organization, and how do you contribute to the overall achievement of the objectives of the goals of the organization or targets which have been set within the organization. So in today's learning outcome, we're going to be focused on understanding, personality and perception. And there are bits and pieces in that we'll be looking at in terms of covering the learning outcome 1. Then there are learning outcome 2, which is the next lecture, then 3, and then 4. Now, when we look at going towards the end of the unit specification, you'll find what is called the assessment grid. Now, this basically is going to be used later to develop assignments, and the assignments will be 2 in this particular unit. You'll have one assignment which will be primarily covering learning outcome 1. There will be another learning outcome 1 and 2, and the second assignment is going to be covering learning outcome 3 and 4. This is a structured way of how Pearson has implemented the quality code in its qualifications. So it follows what is called the university guidelines, and it does not believe in giving one assignment for the unit. So obviously the assessment that you do or write is basically going to be based on what you're studying and how you're able to then reflect the knowledge that you've gained from this study by submitting assessments. And they will be a combination of either a PowerPoint presentation, in some cases it is mostly reports or development of case studies when you present evidence. And this is something that we will cover in the assignment discussions after we have covered learning outcome 1 and 2, because that will be the first assignment. Then we'll cover learning outcome 3 and 4, and that will be the after that will be the second assignment. So this grid is important, is for you to reference that if you're looking at achieving a higher grade and obviously hitting a particular grade in this unit, then you need to know that what you are going to be attempting, which are going to be described as holistic tasks when you see the assignment. They're not very going to be clearly labeled as P1 and P2 and M1 and things like that. But what will happen is there'll be a scenario which will be given. That scenario is going to be like a case study. And with that scenario, you'll have a few bullet points given, which will address all the, assessment criteria given here in this particular, grid. So depending on the assignment, that is where the assessment criteria will be. So when you hit the grade, in pass, you are basically discussing theory. You're discussing or explaining, not discussing, you're explaining the theory. In merit, you discuss it, wherein your discussion will typically involve maybe taking or going into building arguments, looking at positive, negative advantages, disadvantages, maybe a bit of comparison to explain the theory or the frameworks or the models. And then when you give an example towards the end, that will help you achieve the merit tasks. And when we talk about distinction, you're going to be showing an application. That would mean that you would need to give a working example, and then and only then you're going to be looking at achieving a distinction for that particular assessment criteria. So although there are tasks, they are shown as different tasks, but when you do the assignment, there will be one bullet point which will have a bit of a narration on it, which will say assess the personality traits, blah blah blah. Then what are the challenges that you could face, and then it will be dovetailed into how would these be used to motivate your workforce. And that would mean if you attempt it in a way wherein you explain the theory, go into the models, then talk about building arguments and give the positives, negatives, or the supporting evidence to explain or elaborate that. And then towards the end, put an example with application that would help you achieve the highest grade. Now, towards the end of this, there are some books which are recommended and there are some websites which are given. And I would suggest the websites are obviously, open in the sense that you can click on these links and it'll straight away take you to the websites. So there is Business Balls, which is a very popular site across that you will see in all Pearson units, because the content of this site, has case studies and key theories and frameworks which are summarized very nicely. So this could be your first point in terms of additional reading apart from the slides and the books that we will provide on the unit. There will be another. So these are sites that you can look at. That's one. And then out of these 4 books, we will have at least 1 or 2 which are going to be available. And you could, the books by Hutchinsky in particular and Mullins in particular are already available. So you would be able to see them after your session today when I upload the PowerPoint along with the books and the mentions of these websites. Now, these books are extensive, academic books, as you would normally go and get it from the library. But the versions that we provide are going to be ebooks, which are similar, exactly the same, but in electronic format. The only bit that you will have to do is look at reading limited, or let's say directive chapters or pages which are directly related to the indicative content given in the book. Should you wish to study and develop more knowledge and obviously detailing on the unit, feel free, be my guest, and obviously you can start reading through the book. And the books essentially that you read, or the chapters that you read, will essentially help you gain examples, because there are lots of working examples in the book. They are going to give you knowledge about how some of the let's say problematic issues or burning issues are solved, and they are presented through case studies. And obviously theoretical frameworks and models will also be given in detail. So when you do your assignment, it is good that you go through the books, you go through websites, articles and journals, and then develop a comprehensive bibliography towards the end of presenting your evidence, which would help you to achieve the highest grade possible. So this is just a bit of a brief introduction on the unit, the topic, and what all is going to be covered, how is it going to be covered, and what all will be available for you to look at the process of learning for this particular unit. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. So any questions at any given stage that you have, feel free to ask me and stop me there. So I will take them on and obviously obviously give you more details. Now, what I'm going to do is obviously switch over to a PowerPoint presentation. And what we are going to do in that presentation is primarily look at some of the key bits of what all is required to be covered in Learning Outcome 1. So let me just switch you over. Okay, so this particular unit, organizational behavior, everybody can see the slide?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Okay, that's great. Just a quick bit of feedback sometimes is useful, because otherwise it looks like a bit of a monologue which is happening. So yeah, keep obviously saying yes, or obviously through the chat route you can interact and ask questions. Now I put some of the key bits in, which is the unit aim. Now for this particular unit, we are looking at, as I mentioned to you, developing knowledge about how individuals and groups behave within a particular structure when they are put together to achieve a common objective. And obviously here, the idea would be to look at taking up some case studies to understand various, business situations wherein we'll see the unit being, or the models that you study within this unit being put into practice. The end objective of this unit primarily is to help you achieve a very good understanding and a range of skills, which will be, through gaining theoretical knowledge on key models, frameworks, which are required to manage human resources or manage teams. And in general, when you work yourself within an organization, how do you look at behavior, dealing with behavior, managing people, and obviously looking at, making them effectively work with systems, processes, and, other people or resources within the organization. Now, in the indicative content, I've just briefly explained, this is something which we have put across from the unit spec. So this is something which is what we are going to cover in today's session. And let's start off with some key terminology and concept, which I've also explained, that what does the area of organization behavior include, and what all we are going to be looking at studying within this context. So this was a part of the introduction. Now, what I would want to do is basically show an informational video, which is a 2 or 3 minute long video. And what I want to do is obviously show this to you, because this actually explains in like a bird's eye view of gives you a bird's eye view essentially, or shows you in a bird's eye view in terms of what does organizational behavior essentially mean. Now, all the videos that I normally put on the slides are hyperlinked, so when you click on the PDF options of it, they will straight away take you to the video on YouTube. So let me just put this on, and then I will share the screen.
Monday.com, our team is drowning. Our days used to split between work and management.
So let's show you the video now. Okay, here we go. So let me just expand the screen a bit, and I'll play this video.
What exactly is meant by the term organizational behavior, and why should it be studied? Answers to these two fundamental questions will help you better appreciate organizational behavior as a field and can be of value to you in your future. Let's take a look. Organizational behavior, or OB, is the study of human behavior in organizational settings, of the interface between human behavior and the organization, and of the organization itself. Although we can focus on any one of these three areas, we must also remember that all three are ultimately necessary for a comprehensive understanding of organizational behavior. This figure illustrates this view of organizational behavior. It shows the linkages among human behavior in organizational settings, the individual organization interface, the organization itself, and the environment surrounding the organization. Each individual brings to an organization a unique set of personal characteristics and unique personal background and set of experiences from other organizations. Therefore, in considering the people who work in their organization, managers must look at the unique perspective each individual brings to the work setting. But individuals do not work in isolation. They come in contact with other people and with the organization in a variety of ways. Points of contact include managers, coworkers, formal policies and procedures of the organization, and various changes implemented by the organization. In addition, over time, individuals change as a function of their personal experiences and mastery, as well as through work experiences and organizational development. An organization, of course, exists before a particular person joins it and continues to exist after he or she leaves. Thus, the organization itself represents a critical third perspective from which to view organizational behavior. The core of OB is being effective at work. Understanding how people behave in organizations and why they do what they do is critical to working effectively with and managing others. Organizational behavior gives everyone the knowledge and the tools they need to be effective at any organizational level. Organizational behavior is an important topic for anyone who works or will eventually work in an organization, which is the case for most people. Moreover, OB is actually important to us as individuals from numerous perspectives. Organizations as a whole also benefit from OB. Imagine the difference between a company with motivated, engaged employees with clear goals aligned with business strategy, and one with unhappy employees, a lot of conflict, weak leadership, and a lack of direction. OB also helps organizations perform well. A mounting body of evidence shows that an emphasis on the softer side of business positively influences bottom-line results. By listening to employees, recognizing their work, building trust, and behaving ethically, managers have boosted performance.
So as you can see in this small video, what we've been able to understand is what is organization behavior and why it is essentially important in terms of to understand the role and the significance of OB, in short, as it is called, for you in particular when you work within the organization. What we also want to be able to do is let's look at what was your perspective in terms of when you looked at the video. What did you understand from the video when you looked at it? And now that we've seen the video, what is your view? What is organization behavior?
So basically, sir, organization behavior is to assess what the people need and provide what the people need and what the organization needs, and to align them so that the organization can work efficiently.
Absolutely. I think that's a fair assumption in terms of what you've presented. Yes, it is primarily related to understanding the needs and wants of individual when they work within the organization. Any thoughts from you here?
From what I learned was that organization behavior describes how people interact with like another side of an organization. So like this can like influence a business, and it can show us how well a business performs. Like it's a key role in a business, and can like really it can really affect a business.
That is correct as well. So two different perspectives from two of you. So essentially, Nandish's perspective was also correct in the sense that, yes, it is basically trying to understand the needs and wants of what the individuals need to be able to perform within the organization. And to a certain extent, your perspective in terms of maybe a bit of a practical way of looking at in terms of OB as a subject is what you have mentioned. So yeah, both of you are essentially correct. But yes, the main essence being that currently we are looking at studying this because all of us want to understand how does the culture, behavior, attitudes, let's also put in politics, working within teams, and let's say people at different tiers work together to be able to get things done. So let me just switch you over now back to the slides. And what we will do is go into and understand a bit more. Now, the reason, this video maybe is, it's not, there are loads of aspects to, obviously organization behavior, but one of the key bits which the video actually focuses on is explaining a bit of an overview. So at least that is what we wanted to get. And I'm glad that both of you have been able to, essentially get that as a perspective. Now, as I mentioned that when we look at studying this, there are loads of different types of sciences that we will get into. And one of the key things that we need to understand when you look at study of individual within the organization is to look at the personality of the individual. Now, there are several approaches to understanding human personality or human, what are the traits, what are the attributes that you have, what are the skills, what are the strengths and weaknesses that you have, and that typically define or kind of influence what is your personality. Now, when we look at these approaches and when we look at how these approaches can essentially entail out, we need to just look at a bit of an oversight into understanding what do we mean by the different traits or facets of human personality. Now, they are defined in different ways. So one, you could look at pseudodynamic approach, which is, or psychodynamic approach in particular, wherein this approach is focused on the Freudian and Jungian theories. And we are going to look at taking a bit of help of psychology, which is one of the things which sometimes crops into the study of organization behavior. And here, basically, what we want to understand is how the individual is growing primarily in its so what I would say is, how do you mature and grow as an individual with experience and with time, and how does it help shape up your personality? So sometimes when we talk about people who have had a number of years of experience, they have been through similar situations or have had experience of similar situations, then it helps them be better prepared to meet a challenge when they are faced with that particular challenge again. And this is basically the psychodynamic approach, wherein the emphasis tends to be on the unconscious thoughts and emotions because of the fact that you have had these experiences in the past, and these experiences then allow you to deal with certain complex problems or situations when they are faced. The second approach that we look at in terms of understanding, the personality of an individual within an organization sometimes is the behavioral approach. The key essence of the behavioral approach is to understand how an individual reacts or, reacts to a different in terms of different situations. And this basic approach essentially suggests that when we are faced with external factors or influences which externally kind of affect us, then in those cases you would see the person behaving in a very different way, because the checks and balances which the external forces will put would be depicting or affecting the individual to behave in a particular manner. Now, a simple example of this generally would tend to be that when we look at the carrot and stick approach that we sometimes use with our kids at home, and if they are not listening or if they raise their voice, then obviously you show through a bit of your reaction and emotions that you're cross at them, and that tends to be a bit of an approach which falls back on carrot and stick. That means if you do this, you're going to get that. If you are going to do and agree with what I'm asking you to do, then you will get this as a reward. So this approach is based on how externally you're affected, in how externally your behavior is going to be affected, and sometimes rewards and punishment tends to be the outcome of how behavioral approaches essentially help manage a team or an individual within the organization. Then we also look at humanistic approach, we also look at trait-based approach, and we also look at biological approach. Now, these are all approaches that we can use to study the human personality. Now, one other humanistic approach that is important that we need to understand is that here the work done by Maslow, one of the scientists which basically carried out work on motivational theories, and later on his research and studies helped in the development of what is called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So when we talk about humanistic approach, the Maslow's theory of hierarchy and Rogers, when we look at maybe other sectors, you look at the person-centered approach, are the approaches that typically, look at defining how do we study an individual, or how do we look at influencing an individual basis how they are and what they want in terms of their, in terms of their needs and wants. So Maslow's theory of hierarchy primarily focuses on 5 different, he created a pyramid, and that pyramid essentially, talked about the 5 different types of needs which humans have, and they tend to be needs starting with physiological needs, safety needs, love needs, belonging needs, self-esteem needs, and they are, organized in a pyramid. And if you have ever looked at the Maslow's theory of hierarchy, and if I bring this picture across, this is what the humanistic approach tends to be. So in this case, what happens is, if we know that the individual he's a starter, he's a new joinee in the organization, somebody who's a newbie in the organization, his main need is going to be psychological or physiological, and that is going to be looking at, maintaining the job, settling into the job, which will allow him to get, basic needs like, food, shelter, and, things in terms of, say, clothing and other bits. Now, if you have somebody who's worked in the organization, say, for 3 to 5 years, you would probably be looking at safety needs, things like the person would have moved on, that, okay, now I'm a part and parcel of the organization, and, my job is stable and I'm not going to go anywhere. So his needs would move from being physiological to safety, because here he's looking at stability, he's looking at maybe increased wages or salary, he's looking at, obviously, because he or she is settled in the job, they are looking at higher needs than what the physiological needs would be, and things like looking at, buying maybe certain products or, things that you would say, and maybe buying a car, buying a house, things like that. And then you go up and it goes to love and belonging, wherein you want a sense of belonging within the organization. You want the organization to respect you. You expect loyalty. You expect a sense of connection, which is to say that, you are somebody and your opinions and your work that you do is appreciated within the organization. And then going into self-esteem, which is basically talking about that here you want respect, you want a title, you want, hierarchy, or you want to be, respected because of the number of years of experience that you have done or put in within the organization. And last but not the least, at the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, wherein you're actually wanting to put things to work because you've racked up 15, 20, 30 years of experience. over 20-25 years of experience generally, and in that case the person is more into doing things and because or putting their experiences into doing things which they have learned, and that is where the self-actualization need actually comes in, which is the desire to be to become more known in the market or more known within the organization. So humanistic approach has lots of theories that we look at studying, but generally the Maslow's five tier theory of needs, hierarchy of needs, essentially is what we refer to when we talk about studying personality. So if I look at as a live example that I'll give you, if I work and run an organization and I'm an HR manager, and obviously there is a need that we are looking at expanding this year, then what you would be looking at is, are you looking at hiring newbies or freshers, as we call them, or are you looking at hiring people with 3 to 5 years of experience, or maybe 10 or 15 years of experience? How many headcount are you increasing? And when you're increasing, then you're looking at the job descriptions being suitably tailored to attracting the right talent and the candidates to be then getting them into the organization. Obviously, that'll go through a process of interview, selection, things like that. But your policies, processes in terms of job description, adverts, remuneration, package, it will have to be commensurate to the type of talent that you're attracting within to join or within the organization. Then we look at the trait approach. The trait approach tends to be, heavily focused on the traits that you have as an individual. And when we talk about, the trait theory in particular, in general, you would also look at, some of the, and it is very closely linked to the personality, and that is why it is called the trait theory. So here we are basically focused on broadly understanding what are the traits, what are the key, let's say, areas of how you behave, how would your habitual patterns of behavior will be, how do you react to a certain situation, and how do you weigh things in terms of this being right, this being wrong. So personality or personality trait approach, or the theory, essentially focuses on your thoughts, emotions, and feelings, and your behavior in general. And the basic idea of the theory in psychology is that it rests on the idea that people differ from one another on the basis of strengths and intensity of the traits that they have. Do you have more skills? Do you have less skills? Do you have more of hard skills? Do you have less of soft skills? You have a balance of hard and soft skills, and that would help you essentially articulate your thoughts, your feelings, and that is where the trait theory comes in when you try and understand an individual. Now, biological approach tends to be, which is genetic. So sometimes when we say he's a genius, or we talk about people that, he's able to get everything, he's able to crack everything. So this is basically genetics. In some cases, the biological approach, which is to say that as sometimes we literally would say that, okay, because you've been through this situation a couple of times, you will come out on top on this time as well, because you know exactly how to interact or how to behave or how to adapt to that particular situation. So in this case, some part of it is experience-led or evolutionary, as we call it, and some part of it is genetics, which is basically focused on understanding that, okay, these are things that you've got probably because of experience or your background, and that would be the biological approach. Now, the second bit that we want to understand because we want to understand behavior, so we start with personality, but the second bit that we want to understand is what is nomothetic and what is ideographic perspectives and what are their implications. So when we talk about these two concepts in general in the field of organization behavior, what we're essentially looking at is talking about what are the general laws and principles that apply to an individual, and what are the general laws and principles which essentially apply to an organization or a company. Because company is also treated as a legal entity, but when we look at the legal entity, the running of the legal entity and not its operation, it is run by a person. So here, what could be the general laws and principles which could apply to individual, and what kind of traits, qualities, let's say behavior would that individual show when they are faced with a particular situation. And that would generally be the nomothetic approach in terms of understanding behavior of an individual within the organization. And sometimes this is best seen when you are dealing with different constructs or situations, in the sense that if you're faced with different challenges, every time you're faced with a challenge, you adapt. but you also look at how to overcome that challenge, and the approaches and the let's say the activities that you undertake to be able to overcome that challenge is normally then going to help you in the future, because these are traits that you are developing, and that would be a part of the nomadic perspective or nomadic approach. Now, in contrast to this, if we look at the ideographic perspective, here you're looking at an individual which will have unique qualities and characteristics, and they would be essentially used by the individual in specific contexts and environments. So sometimes when you're faced with a problem, you would react to that problem by looking at understanding it, or maybe looking at working through it pretty much straight away in terms of the approach that you think is the best way to solve that problem. But your manager or somebody who has been in that situation or has dealt with that situation a number of times in the past would have a very individual perspective of how this problem has to be dealt with. So an example would be an engineer here who's or maybe a team of engineers who are working on building a flyover. And assuming if the flyover, construction gets delayed, or obviously in some cases, if the phases of construction of the flyover are met with problems, then you would generally have engineers working on the problem in order to ensure that the problems have a solution. And obviously, if this kind of a problem occurs or this occurs in the future, then they could avert this particular situation. But the role of a chief engineer, if you put the hat on of a chief engineer, he would be looking at an ideological approach of designing the project in such a way that if he has anticipated that some of these problems which have been faced earlier and in similar projects, then the person would be looking at putting the approaches or the challenges that he has faced in previous projects into a new project, so that they do not face the problems at the first instance itself. So the approach here would be to look at evaluating and looking at qualitative ways to change how to qualitative ways in which the chief engineer would be looking at doing away with these set of problems even at the start, even before the project has started. And this would be based on his individual's personality, and which is the personality of the chief engineer. And because he has had a number of years of experience and he's worked on similar projects, here he's going to be bringing in his knowledge and the previous experiences to be able to ensure that this problem does not occur while the project is being undertaken. So as an example, the ideographic approach tends to be more of individualistic approach, an individualistic approach in which the individual has had a previous prior experience, and in this case learnings or lessons have been learned, and the user would put his personal perspective in to try and avoid a similar situation wherein these kind of problems can occur. Now, both these approaches are quite different, and you would generally see these approaches both working within the organization, within different teams. And obviously, in some cases, these approaches would also be at loggerheads, which means that they would also be, they could also lead to creation of conflicts, because sometimes when you have people who are quite experienced and they generally have had or have worked through some similar situations in the past, their approaches are also going to be independent and obviously very different to each other if they are working together in a particular team. And that is where sometimes you would generally see that these approaches can also be creating conflicts if you have people with similar experience or similar background also working within the teams. Now, the other bit that we want to look at in terms of understanding, personality and perceptions of individuals and how they work and, work through various, things within the organization would be, to a certain extent, ideographic approach is going to be based on the consciousness and the previous experience of the individual. So, that's one of the other ways of putting it across, Nandish. Now, when we look at understanding personality and how these approaches essentially influence an individual's behavior within the organization, you're also going to be looking at the 5 big dimensions of human personality. So these 5 big dimensions, which essentially play an important part, would typically relate to extrovert or extroversion, agreeableness. That means either they, most candidates, are they, in a frame of mind wherein they are able to take on additional work or say yes to work. They are, effectively ready or are in a mode of readiness to be able to work within teams. They agree on similar decisions and similar courses of action. You are looking at, consciousness, you're looking at emotional stability, and you're also looking at people being open to experiencing new types of ways of working or new types of trying things which would eventually lead or have the similar outcomes. But in some cases, if I've taken an example here that I would give is that a literal example that I would give here is that if you were a painter or a decorator, and if you are asked to paint a fence which is say 1,000 yard long, then generally speaking, the first time when you would have started work, you would have done a manual, you would have done painting through the brush. But as you've become more experienced and you've started to understand that how technology can enable you to complete this work faster, you must have looked at investing into maybe buying a motorized spray gun, and that would mean that you could spray the fence or cover this coloring of the fence to be done much more quickly. And as you grow with experience, you grow and have money, you have people within your team, you might then look at taking up multiple pieces of work. And in those cases, you have team or people who work for you essentially doing that work rather than you having to, do it yourself. So in those cases, there is an openness in the individual to be able to experience these things. And as the experience, as you have done some of these things in the past, what it helps you to develop is experiences wherein you are able to be more productive and more efficient in terms of doing the same work time and again. Now, these 5 traits are required within, this is something which managers essentially look at in terms of when they pick individuals to put them into teams. So when we look at you being selected over somebody else to work within a team or a new project, is because your manager or somebody who is, responsible for putting it together has seen these 5 personality traits, or the big 5 dimensions as we call it, in your in the way you work within the organization, and that has prompted that, okay, you have been selected or you have been given precedence over other colleagues within the organization with similar experience. But because you show these 5 qualities or traits which make a big part of your personality and show that you're open, you're agreeable, you are consciously aware of that why you've been brought into the team to get the work done, or you're emotionally quite stable when faced with challenging situations or problems, you are not freaking out, or you're not essentially panicking, and you're essentially able to work with other individuals to get work done, to get things moving forward. And that is where you're looking at understanding, I would say, the aspects of human personality. Now, in this mix, after understanding a bit of personality and why individuals' personality is a big part of organizational behavior in its study, is what we also want to do is to understand what is culture and how does culture influence how people behave within the organization. Now, culture typically refers to the working of an individual within the organization, and this is the demonstration of the behavior of the individual, which basically talks about let's say how the person actually, if that let me put it in another way. So when we talk about culture, we talk about culture in terms of understanding the various manifestations of, say, human behavior or human intellect. And in this case, what I'm referring to is that how do you behave in a situation which could influence your behavior? And that would be, say, ideas, your customs, your background, your beliefs, and to a certain extent how you work with other individuals within the society. So when we talk about the definition of culture, the definition of culture tends to be, if I have to look at a typical definition of culture, it would define all the ways in which you would typically look at things being done and how you would pass the experience of doing certain things or the way that you carry out things from your end to somebody who you are taking on as a mentee, or somebody who you are taking on as an apprenticeship or apprentice, and essentially training that individual. So here, the passing of the traits, which are basically experiences that you've had over the years from one person to the other, would be termed as maybe culture. Now this, if I relate to the organization, the way the organization works, behaves, when I say works and behave, works means the way individuals within the organization work, they behave, they dress, they talk about, they come across, would essentially be dovetailed as the culture of the organization. Because if you imagine an engineering organization and a production floor, normally what we'll have is all the workers, all the managers, everybody in the production floor will be dressed in a uniform, because that is the uniform for that department. That is how they are easily identifiable, and you would normally see that happening. If you go to a company and you see all the employees wearing an employee card around their neck with a card holder, then you would generally see that this is an organizational culture, that all employees have to have their employee ID card, across the pen holder in the neck. So that would say a lot of things, and that is where you are going to be looking at forming an opinion to say, okay, when I go to Apple, or when I go to Microsoft, or when I go to Tesco, or when I go to, say, for example, Asda, you generally see there's somebody at the door, and and if you go to any of the grocery stores, you normally see a guard or somebody at the door, or an Apple store, and what you'll generally see is that somebody would greet you, good morning, good afternoon, or whatever, and they will greet you. And that shows the culture, that they are respectful to customers. And if that is something which is being done by all employees, you would see this as something, as a part of the culture of the organization, that this is how they behave with customers, this is how they greet customers, and this is how they look at dealing with customers. And in general, the culture of the organization also shapes up what is called the structure of the organization. So when we talk about culture, where we are going to be looking at Charles Handy's model of culture, is one of the clear ways to understand what are the different types, and how they would influence the structure or the way organization works in terms of and delivers goods and services to its customers in the market. So when we talk about Charles Handy's framework essentially looks at defining the culture into 4 basic types. And if I bring this across to put this in perspective, obviously in this particular field you will see work goes on, and there are different types of cultures which are being added as the study of organization culture is advanced. So when we talk about the different types of cultures which Charles Handy proposed, now he essentially, when we look at Charles Handy and his work in general, you would generally see that he was a leading authority in organizational culture, and he basically came up with this framework that when you look at organizations, there are 4 types of cultures, and they are basically defined as power, role, task, and person. And in his context, when we talk about in general, because his work was done in the 1940s and 1950s, his way of looking at is that, and he's a philosopher, so his way of looking at was that after World War, the reason I say this is because he was born in the 1930s, but when we look at the work, when he had presented his work and this model and framework came about in the late 50s, you would generally see that after World War II, more or less most economies were destroyed. There was a large-scale industrialization which started in most of the Western countries, that what we get to see in terms of development today. So people had no jobs, people started to work within factories, and obviously these factories were churning out goods and services which were being sold to consumers within their own countries first. And in the 70s and 80s, we saw internationalization happening, wherein companies in Japan, companies in Europe started also exporting to other countries goods and services like washing machines, refrigerators, the basic articles that we get to see when we look at a home. Now, when he proposed this particular model, he came up with his studies, and obviously, then at that stage, he talked about these four cultures. And when we look at the four different type of cultures, his main aim of categorizing them was on the basis of how this individual trait, which is power, role, task, and person, help the individual behave in a particular fashion. So when we talk about power, what we generally see is that in some organizations, you would see that power remains in the hands of few people, and they are the only ones who are able to make decisions or can authorize decisions. So in this case, what you look at is people with this particular ability to be able to, make decisions is considered sometimes as a special privilege. And when we talk about this special privilege, what you would generally see is that they would be people who are working in important positions. And because they are working in important positions, you're generally going to be able to see that these people essentially would be looking at responsibly making decisions for the organization. A simple example that I would give you is if you work within the HR and you are the HR manager, you have the ability and responsibility to make decisions on budgeting. How much is going to be spent on recruiting this year? How much is going to be spent on training this year? And you have that ability to be able to make decisions. When we talk about, people and employees with these kind of responsibilities, they do not have the liberty to share their opinions and views openly in an open forum within the organization. Because if, say, for example, these people have that privilege of, being able to make decision because of the title that they have in the organization, that gives them power. And that power essentially then allows them to make these decisions which could affect other employees within the organization or other employees or people working within the organization. So this type of a culture, which can be sometimes seen in organization, leads to sometimes major unrest. That means very few people with power and the ability to make decisions can make right or wrong decisions. And if the decisions do not go well or go down well with people within the organization, you would generally see that there's an unrest or an uneasiness which tends to happen. And you would normally see employees not being happy. And, in those cases, in some cases, you see employees, good people leaving the organization. Now, the second type of culture tends to be the task culture. The task culture tends to be wherein people are working within teams. They're happy to achieve targets. They are basically given targets and they are, happy to work together in teams and they solve critical problems. They're able to essentially focus on the task at hand. And you would generally see that these organizations and people which work within these teams have a common interest. And because of the common interest, they are able to form a team or a group. And this team or a group then is able to achieve or accomplish solving, problems or given any sort of a situation, they are able to fulfill the task and or achieve the objective or complete the goal. And in this case, each member of the team contributes equally, and they are able to have that sense of achievement that, yes, we have done it together. So this culture is something which is favored within all organizations, specifically when you look at multinational or large organizations. You would see the culture is generally task oriented. You would normally see decision making, is segmented at different levels. Wherever individuals are required to make decisions, the decision making authority is delegated, and people feel empowered to work within this culture. And this tends to be the ideal setup that an organization strives to attain when we look at the individuals working within the organization. When from a point of view of Charles Handy's 4 different cultures, the role culture tends to be wherein all employees are designated a different role, and because of the designation of their role, the role tends to be a specialization. So if you work within a marketing department and you are you're handling one particular area. So in the marketing department, if you handle advertising, somebody in marketing department handle events, somebody handles digital or campaigns, somebody handles, for example, promotions, which could be below the line promotion. Somebody handles media, which is above the line promotions in radio, TV, print. So you are all somebody's a graphics designer or maybe works with digital side of things. So here what you're looking at is the role being a specialist role, wherein the designation of that role means that individuals have to work in silos to a certain extent, but because of the specialization of their roles, they have also got the ability to be able to have what is called the decision making. And this ability to be able to make decision makes their roles mutually exclusive. And because they are in a specialist role, they have maybe credentials on the academic side. And that is one of the reasons why they are in that particular role. You would generally see that here the individuals kind of work independently, but the decision making in some cases tends to be slow because the decision making is delegated to a number of individuals at different levels. And that is where sometimes if a unanimous decision has to be taken to run a campaign or do a campaign with all departments or all areas involved, then you would generally see sometimes people will put back and say, oh, no, I don't think my budget needs to be used here because this is not going to be beneficial for the organization. It is nothing to do with events or it is nothing to do with promotion. So our budget should not be touched. And that is where sometimes you tend to have conflicts or indecision, or decision making tends to be very slow. The last type of culture is person culture. The person culture is where an employee feels that they are an important part of the organization. The organization itself puts a lot of emphasis on human resources, and here the individuals concerned are going to feel that they are let's say, if I use the right word, they are cared for, they are looked after by the organization, and the organization actually cares and takes into account the opinions that they have when looking at making or taking key decisions in terms of fulfillment of goals and objectives. The management is also quite tuned. That means they're quite aligned to making sure that each individual's opinion is heard. And obviously, in this kind of a culture, what happens is the management never takes a decision to favor any particular person. If there are going to be incentives, rewards given, then they're going to be given equally to all individuals within the organization. A simple example that I would put here is that if you look at startup organizations, people, when at some stages businesses, start up as a new company or a new idea, you would generally see the founders of the organization will also give out something called the employee stock options. That means each individual employee working within the company is given certain number of shares, and these certain number of shares then can be divested at any given point in time, subject to a schedule or other things being given. But yes, the number of shares which are given would be given commensurate to the title or the position or the responsibility that you hold. But in one essence, everybody becomes a part owner of the organization. And if the founders decide that we look at respecting people who work within the organization, and because of which they make a significant contribution, the employee stock option scheme or an option is given to all employees, and all employees will be given shares as a reward, essentially, and that would show what is called the person culture in the organization. Is that okay? Is that clear?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
that's okay.
Okay. Now, with the evolution of time and obviously how things are changing in the world, what we are also getting to see is that there are other typical types of work cultures which are also appearing. One such which has made a significant dent is the entrepreneurial culture. So you would generally see when we talk about certain countries or certain aspects, certain sectors, you would see that there is the government at some point in time also promotes venture capitalism or startups and things like that, which would basically look at bringing in more investment, which would look at bringing in, more talent into the country or in a location, and that would generally create jobs or growth prospects, for the organization, for the economy, and for the country as a whole. So when we talk about entrepreneurial culture, this is also, important, is because over the years, when we look at the first, dot-com bubble, which burst in the early 2000s, and then we see the financial crash in 2007 and 8, and then we saw the recession because of COVID, you would generally see that in order to get back to where the previous spends were in the economy. The government tends to promote what is called capitalism. And in this case, they, promote capitalism is because they want people to come in, take a bit of risk, and higher the risk, sometimes higher the rewards. What you will generally see is the government is trying to essentially promote what is called the entrepreneurial culture, within the country, or sometimes you would see this, that CEOs or chief executives essentially also, promote this culture within the organization. And this is best described as when leaders actually motivate employees within the organization to create or take risks. And that is done primarily because they are looking at either a diversification, they are looking at, employees becoming more aggressive, which would mean that if they are able to create an idea and the organization and other people follow through to make that idea work, that could mean that there will be significant or larger gains which the organization as well as the individual can essentially do. So this kind of a culture is what we generally see within startups or within innovative companies which are only producing services, which are basically virtual, not a physical product, but a virtual product. And they tend to be taking more of risk to basically look at promoting the concept of entrepreneurship. And this culture, which leaders, managers, top management within that organization essentially, inculcate and push, would be termed as what is called the entrepreneurial culture. Now, at this stage, I would say you're looking at understanding the Charles Handy's framework, but yes, there are other additions which are happening as we see advancements in this particular field of study also happening. Now, so I've covered the Charles Handy culture, and there are a lot of other models which we also get to see, which will be defining how the organizational culture is shaped up. And some part of this would be to look at studying the Sheen, Handy, and Hofstede frameworks as well. And that is what we are going to look at discussing, in the subsequent slide. Now, these, apart from Charles Handy's framework, also were people who basically did carry out research and studies within this sector. And their aim was also to come out with what is called the different frameworks of, how culture and as the structure of the organization is generally, influenced and created when we have number of people working, coming from different backgrounds, different places, having different culture, beliefs, race, religion, and they come together under one roof and they start working in an organization to achieve certain aims and objectives. Now, an organizational culture, if I have to summarize, what does an organizational culture, how does it get formed, and why is it relevant? Now, typically because you have individuals working within the organization from different areas, they come across with different beliefs, different maybe religion, caste, and they have different experiences. They come from different geographic regions, and because they have different beliefs, at some stage you would generally see that all of these would then influence the formation of a culture of the organization. Now, a simple example that I would give you is when I look at Tesco, and I'm picking up, say, more or less, companies based in the UK. So if I look at Tesco, if I look at in the US, Starbucks, if I look at towards India, for example, Reliance, or if I look at Asia and look at, multinationals like Coca-Cola or Microsoft or LinkedIn, what do you get to see? When you go to their website, you see a particular logo or an image or a pictorial description of the company in terms of why it is and how it is. So when you look at LinkedIn, the way you see how LinkedIn is written is LIN is normal plain letters, but LinkedIn, IN, essentially is in a solid blue background with, some sort of a 3D rendering done to it. Now, this is a pictorial depiction of, in a way, the logo of the organization becomes also a pictorial depiction of what kind of culture or what kind of culture will be there in the organization. So these elements of your brand, of the logo, of your tagline, the way people dress, behave, and deal, how you send out emails, what kind of externally, when communication is done internally and externally, the style in which the communication is done, and when people go and see others within the organization, within the office, when I say, and you have a face-to-face interaction, you would generally experience what would be called as the culture of the organization. And this is nothing going to be but a set of shared values and beliefs which are formed of people coming from different cultures, different backgrounds, having different beliefs, religion, things like that. And that is what you see as a culmination of, or a cross of what is called the organizational culture. Because sometimes you see organizations, they have different operations in different countries, and what they do in different countries is they adapt their products and services to meet the requirements of and needs of the customer in that location. So in some cases you would see a change in packaging, in some cases you would see the change of language on the packaging, in some cases you would see the warranty conditions being changed because they need to be meeting the laws and regulations of that location, and they will all be influencing or have a direct or an indirect influence on the culture of the organization. Is that okay? So some of the factors that we would put in terms of the way a culture of the organization would be the size of the organization. If you have 20 employees, 2 employees, 200 employees, 2,000, 20,000, 200,000 employees, the size of the organization in terms of the number of employees, sheer number of employees working would make a difference on how they behave and work and deliver, and outwardly they are seen in the as a structure or as a group by the customers when they are looked at in the market. Technology, diversity, age, ownership, history of the organization, they will all be considered major factors of how these factors influence the culture and what kind of culture forms in the organization. There could be other influences. These other influences could be internal or external. External influences could be political, it could be economical, it could be technological, it could be competition, and these will also affect how the organization shapes up. Now, one such example that I would give you is that we have lately heard in the news that a lot of companies in the US are also, and in Europe are also laying off or making employees redundant. That means they see certain signals or signs of maybe the Ukraine war or maybe the global economy is slowing up, and what they're doing is they're making employees redundant. Now, this is a trend that is generally getting to be seen because of the external and climate which is affecting the organization in terms of its business. That means that there is more volatility in pound and dollar in terms of fluctuations of a currency exchange. You're looking at supplies being disrupted because of the war happening in Ukraine. You also see, for example, decrease in the efficiency and output of the organizations worldwide, which is what has tipped some economies to go into a mild recession. And all these factors are affecting the business, the company, or the organization from outside, and they are going to be having an influence on the culture. So if suddenly an organization decides to lay off, like Amazon is laying off 14,000 employees, I think. If you look at in the UK, some of the companies have announced that they'll lay off 5,000 workers, 4,000 workers. What does that show? That would mean that the organization is going to downsize. That means a number of key people within key roles that they've been working in for God knows how many years are going to be made redundant. And that would create an atmosphere within the organization that everybody is now looking at helter-skelter, trying to save their job. Am I in the list? Am I not in the list? And that is creating worries. So this kind of volatility which happens in the market because of the political and economic climate, and the companies then take that decision, is going to be affecting the culture of the organization. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now we've
Yes.
discussed. Sorry, go on. Is that okay, Vahira?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what we are going to do is quickly look at one or two other models, in the culture side of things before we do a break in today's session, because I've got a number of slides, and what I don't want to do is go through all the slides today, which is to cover the learning outcome one. Now, one or two other models that we want to quickly look at is, one of the models is the Hofstede model of cultural dimensions. Now, when we look at the Hofstede model of cultural dimensions, this person or this particular person actually proposed, the cultural dimensions of an organization after doing a lot of study in IBM, International Business Machine, which is one of the biggest companies, in the world, a US-based company. And what he then proposed was 4 dimensions that he sees working within an organization. And these 4 dimensions, he defined them as individualism, he defined them as collectivism, he defined them as uncertainty to avoid, certain aspects that you generally get to see working within the organization, power distance index. He also talked about masculinity and femininity within the organization, which is basically task-oriented versus people-oriented culture that you see within the organization. And these 4 dimensions that he talked about, by studying or conducting intensive study within IBM, influenced his particular model that he came out with. And that is why this model is termed as Hofstede cultural dimension model. Now, when we talk about this particular model is quite relevant to organizations wherein you have a lot of employees working in different geographies and in different parts of the world, but they are looking at achieving one common objective. And because they are coming from different geographies and different backgrounds, you would see different sets of cultural beliefs, values, also influencing the way they work, they make decisions, and obviously come together in teams to be able to, put things together. Now, the 4 or 6 dimensions, there are 2 versions to it. So when we talk about the 4 or 6 dimensions of the Hofstede model, we basically look at these 6 dimensions because he conducted his research in the 1970s, and his work, involved working by, looking at studying IBM as an example in 50 different countries, because IBM is a conglomerate and it has presence in very many countries across the globe. So he undertook this massive study for IBM in 50 different locations, and he then identified these 6 dimensions that we look at. Instead of 4, I would say 6 dimensions. So the power distance index, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity. You look at uncertainty, which sometimes organizations want to avoid, and that is where you see things like redundancy, high employee turnover, or companies laying off workers, or downsizing because they see recession coming or economic conditions becoming tough. Long versus short orientation in terms of decision making, and last but not the least, looking at indulgence versus restraint. So sometimes you see companies go on an overdrive. They start recruiting heavily because they see the economy opening up. So after COVID, you would see one of the dimensions that most organizations took was that because they downsized during COVID in order to conserve their profitability or look at downsizing on the operations. When we started to see green shoots and companies coming out of COVID or COVID coming under control, the pandemic, the lockdowns being done away by the government, and situation returning slowly and gradually to normal, a lot of these companies went into an overdrive to basically start recruiting aggressively in the market. And what they thought was that a lot of good talent was made redundant during the period of COVID. So it would give them an opportunity to hire the best talent from the market. And that is where their indulgence versus restraint option in some companies were used. They wanted to hire the best talent because they were available, and they thought that while we are coming out of COVID, it is best to take the first mover advantage and indulge in recruiting quality manpower, which will help increase business and or help increase or regain the lost business that they have lost, essentially business that they've lost during the COVID period. So this particular model has 6 dimensions, and because it was very well researched by him by studying the conditions and how the company operates in 50 different locations. He was able to come out with a comprehensive model, and this comprehensive model of cultural dimensions is very well accepted across organizations. And we do get to see that this is put into work and practice essentially, in large PLC or public sector organizations. So this slide is slightly, I would correct, it has 6 cultural dimensions that have come out because of this particular research that he carried out in IBM, or International Business Machine. Now, basically what you're going to see on Moodle is, I'm going to give you a handout on this, which is going to be a summary of the Hofstede's model, Charles Handy's models, and the Shine model of cultural dimensions that we generally get to see and we need to be aware of when we talk about, learning outcome 1. And that is what I would do is basically stop today's lecture, because we want to then look at the second aspect of it after understanding behavior and the cultural dimensions. We then want to go into what is called, related to the aspect of personality, and that would be the individual perception that we need to study by looking at taking on some personality tests. How does personality influence your perception and behavior? And then what kind of relationships can entail when people work within teams in an organization, and look at a bit on the communication models. So we'll be looking at the attribution and interpersonal theories of communication, and that would be the second part of this particular lecture. Is that okay?
Yes.
Good stuff. So we'll be meeting tomorrow again at 2 p.m. and that would be looking at covering learning outcome 1, so that we are able to comprehensively close the first learning outcome in terms of understanding what is personality, how the culture and structure of the organization is influenced by individual behavior, and what kind of approaches can be taken to study the culture of an organization by understanding these 3 model frameworks. Good stuff. So I will put a copy of this presentation on, which will have the discussion that you can read into for the slides for tomorrow as well. So they will all be there, and I'll put these 2 handouts, and the copy of the recording of today's lecture is accessible on YouTube. So briefly showing you the learner management system, and also where you'll be able to find the lecture, so that at any given stage tomorrow you should be able to see. Today, later in the day, you should be able to see this on your side on the Moodle platform. So if this is the platform, you log in, go into Pearson, go into the course of 2021, and then you scroll all the way down to organization behavior, which is this unit. And this unit would have the presentation that I've done today, which will also have the discussion for tomorrow, which is learning outcome on part 2. And then the recording of it is currently going live here, which is going to be accessible to you under live, and that will clearly be labeled as unit introduction and LO1. Is that okay?
Yes.
Good stuff. So thanks so much for attending. If you have any questions, write them down. We'll do a quick recap tomorrow when we start. And then obviously we'll take it from there to complete the learning outcome 1.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandesh. Thank you, Hira. Take care.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye for now.
Bye.